LAUSD race-based programs, U.S. senators receive tens of thousands of dollars, and America's talking. Here on the Center Square Daily, today is Monday, March 30th. I'm your host, Esther Wickham, standing in for Greg Bishop. First, looking at LAUSD's race-based program, recently a nonprofit called Defending Education is requesting the U.S. Department of Education to reopen and reinvestigate a look at the Los Angeles Unified School District, one of the largest school systems in the country. Now, this centers around something called the Black Student Achievement Plan, and this program, launched in 2021 by Los Angeles Unified School District, looks at the goal of, sounds pretty straightforward, right? Improving academic outcomes, overall well-being for Black students. And this includes looking at culturally responsive teaching, engagement for families, and targeted support to address achievement gaps. Now, this is something that Los Angeles Unified School District has been doing for over 5 years, and though it seems like a nice sentiment, this nonprofit organization doesn't like it and doesn't see, that it's benefiting all of the students within the school district. And so Defending Education argues that the program is crossing a legal line, and their concern says that this offering, that these programs are only benefiting a certain race. It's based on race, and it could potentially raise federal civil rights issues and federal civil rights laws. This originally was filed a complaint back in 2023. Defending Education requested the U.S. Department of Education Civil Rights Office to look into this program, but in 2024, the Department of Education dismissed the request for investigation, saying that there was no evidence of a current violation. And now the group is back 2 years later, requesting the U.S. Department of Education to reinvestigate. They're pointing to public comments by the superintendent, or former superintendent, Alberto Carvalho, during a public board meeting back in 2024, saying that the program is still operating essentially the same way. They're saying that this actually needs to be looked at with a closer scope, saying that this is still race-based, and they're using the specific benefits for race-based students, not for students as a whole within the school district. On the other side, Los Angeles Unified School District responded to the Center Square, pushing back firmly on this question, saying that the district still these issues are still resolved. They are complying with federal civil rights laws, and this program has been updated. They're not excluding anyone. These services are offered to all students regardless of race. In other words, they're saying that, this is inclusive, it is legal, we're following federal law, and we've already addressed these concerns, so the U.S. Department of Education doesn't have to, look into these programs. But according to Defending Education, let's look at how much they're spending, right? LAUSD has allocated $50 million for the Black Student Achievement Plan just in 2025 and 2026 school year, bringing the total funding to roughly $175 million since its launch. And so only in the past year alone, they've allocated, this $50 million. And I think that has raised a lot of bells and concerns for Defending Education, requesting the U.S. Department of Education to investigate. We'll continue to see if the Department of Education will respond or if they'll kind of stand firm on their earlier decision. We'll continue to follow education-related stories like this at thecentersquare.com. Now moving over to a housing bill where many opponents have received tens of thousands of dollars from Blackstone and other groups. Senators voted against a bipartisan housing bill that restricts large institutional investors from buying up single-family homes and requires investors to sell build-to-rent homes within 7 years. The Center Square's reporter, Therese Boudreaux, is here to tell us a little bit more about this. Therese, thanks so much for joining the Center Square Daily. First, looking at this story, could you break down exactly what this housing bill is and essentially what it would do if it was passed?
Sure. So the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, it's a very large, very bipartisan bill that passed the Senate. And it has a lot of, there's a similar bill in the House, and it has a lot of things from that as well. So there are many, many things in it. A lot of it's focused on making manufactured housing easier to build, removing regulations on it. And then some of it is changing zoning laws. So there's concerns from some people, from some groups and critics and lawmakers that this could be the equivalent of the federal government overriding state local zoning laws. So that's something in it. But then another provision in it that really caught my attention was the provision that, as you mentioned, it doesn't allow large institutional investors to hold on to it prevents large institutional investors from buying up more single-family homes. There are exceptions to that, again, just single family, but it also requires that these build-to-rent homes be sold within 7 years. So there are a lot of groups that could be impacted by that. Blackstone is one very major group. They do a lot of that. But then there are groups that also could be interested for other reasons. Private equity firms. There could be companies that secure financing for the institutional investors themselves. So they could lose business if these institutional investors no longer go to them for that financing. So, it's largely bipartisan, and that's why it passed the Senate overwhelmingly. There are only 10 lawmakers who voted against it. But my story was I basically wanted to see, all the lawmakers most of them had different reasons for it. They would say something briefly, but I dug a little deeper. I wanted to see, are there any groups that would be negatively impacted by this bill that their PACs or political action committees or their employees may have donated to these candidates. And I did find some interesting things there.
Yeah, and just like you said, it was largely bipartisan, right? We have a lot of Republicans and Democrats agreeing on this issue. But within your reporting, you're going to break down specifically 10 senators that opposed this bill. Who are those senators? And, we'll get a little bit onto it a little bit later, but just explain, who they are and potentially what was the incentive around their opposition.
Right. So the 10 senators who voted against it, there were 9 Republicans and 1 Democrat. So the Republicans are, you have Tom Tillis, Todd Young, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, Rick Scott, Ron Johnson, Ted Budd, Rand Paul, Tommy Tuberville, and then the Democrat was Brian Schatz from Hawaii. And this is all in the article that's on the Center Square for people who want to dig deeper. But all of them received tens, some of them hundreds of thousands of dollars from these companies that could be impacted. So Blackstone in particular was one. But then you also had Rock Holdings and Coach Inc. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Capital Group companies. And then you also had some organizations that had come out against the bill specifically for that build-to-rent housing provision, such as the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts. So I had to do a lot of digging and a lot of searching to make sure that these were companies who would be impacted in some way. Now, again, it's important to say that just because these lawmakers received funding, from the political action committees or employees of these companies, doesn't mean that they necessarily voted, in accordance with that. But, it's interesting just to see these numbers laid out there. I reached out to all the lawmakers twice, actually, and some of them got back with me. Again, those statements are on the Center Square. Most of them say, no, it wasn't because of that. It was because of something else, or I didn't vote according to, these people didn't tell me what to do. I just voted because I thought it was the right thing to do, So it's, they're not making accusations, but we're pointing out interesting facts.
Yeah. Before we kind of go into that a little bit deeper, Therese, because I'd love for you to highlight, some of those responses that you saw. If we could pull up that graphic again, just to really highlight, how much of that funding is being received by the senators, right? So we see Senator Tom Tillis getting almost $500,000, right? Ted Young, $290,000. Like you said, tens of thousands of dollars receiving from these from Blackstone, large institutional programs and events. Now, some of the senators you reached out to didn't respond or couldn't comment in time, but you did get some interesting reactions and responses. Could you highlight and break that down for us?
Yes, I did. I never got a response from Tom Tillis, which was disappointing, given that he was the over $500,000 person. But I had Todd Young, for instance, he said that he wanted additional changes that he wanted the package to address, especially zoning regulations. So he said that's why he voted against it. Mike Lee, statement from him, he said that he votes according to his own convictions. And he also had, other things that he wanted to see in the bill, and that's why he said he voted against it. Ted Cruz had again, this is all in the center square in the article, but he had a very long statement back, and he was specifically concerned with the central bank digital currency provision. So that was one of the add-ons in the bill. It was something that many Republicans support. It would ban the Federal Reserve from issuing any kind of digital currency, so a digital US dollar, essentially, for the next 4 years, I believe. And he essentially wanted it to be permanent or to at least be longer than 4 years. So that was something that he put in there. But again, I didn't have all of the lawmakers respond to me. I didn't have Rand Paul respond or Brian Schatz or other people. But again, I reached out twice, sometimes 3 times in one case. So, I think it's something that is very important for taxpayers to just see, and, to have those numbers in front of them and just to be able to, I think every lawmaker should be scrutinized, by how they vote, right? And that when you understand that, okay, they also happen to, have this kind of money behind them, I think it's just always good to have more information, right? And people can reach out to the lawmakers themselves as well. I mean, all of these lawmakers have, contact me sections on their website. So, if any taxpayer is interested or wants more information than what's in the article, then they can go do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even going back to Senator Cruz's response, with these digital currencies and how this legislation would prevent it. From your perspective, it's kind of a interesting realm to enter into, but how do you think this kind of fits into the housing bill, right? Because like you said, this legislation is bipartisan. A lot of Republicans may agree they want to prevent the Federal Reserve from issuing central bank digital currency. But, how do you think that plays a role into that discussion? And, do you think that was actually Ted Cruz's kind of guiding factor in opposing this bill?
Well, I just report on the news. I'm not supposed to speculate on it. But it seemed, he says that it was. Lawmakers will often tie different provisions that they want onto a bill when it doesn't seem like there's really much connection. And that's kind of what seemed to happen with the digital currency thing. I think that was a sweetener for a lot of Republicans who may have been kind of wary about, some of the different zoning changes or, perhaps the institutional investor ban. It's not really a full ban. Again, it's pretty mild if you look into what it actually does, but they're calling it institutional investor ban. So in some ways, it's not like you can just attach anything onto a bill, but if it's even remotely related and they think it's going to help get the bill passed, then lawmakers will often do that. So I think that's what kind of went on right here.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Therese. For those interested in following this story, you can go to thecentersquare.com as we continue to attempt to hold senators accountable for the funding that they are, receiving and the opinions and decisions they make on the legislation that impact you, the taxpayer. Now switching over to America's Talking, looking at a quick hits that all these stories can be found at thecentersquare.com, with the first state coming out of Nevada. Federal regulators have granted preliminary approval for Nevada's proposed Desert Bloom hydropower project, which could power about 110,000 homes, but faces strong opposition over its heavy water use amid ongoing Colorado River shortages. Now, out of the state of Louisiana, Meta is expanding its massive Louisiana data center project by funding 10 gas-fired power plants and new energy infrastructures to support AI growth, promising economic benefits while raising concerns that fast-track approval and financing structures that could leave potentially local ratepayers with long-term costs if the company exits early. Lastly, in the state of Michigan, we have the Michigan State Senate passed a last-minute bill renewing the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, ensuring over 8,000 doctors can continue practicing and preventing major disruptions to patient care across the state. If you would like to read more about these stories, the articles will be linked in the description below, and more of these stories can be found at thecentersquare.com. Well, from my studio here in Southern California, thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Esther Wickham. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to the Center Square. We'll be back on Tuesday looking at more stories that impact you, the taxpayer, only here on the Center Square Daily.